Are you waiting for Jesus to come back and save you? Newsflash, you will be waiting for a long, long time because Jesus is never, ever coming back. Why do I say that? Because it's true and the Bible itself says so. As a matter of fact, Jesus said so. Now that I've got your attention, I'll apologize for being so blunt. But it remains. Jesus will never come back. Sorry to disrupt your belief system, but what I said is so true. This emoji may be reflecting what you are thinking and feeling hearing this. Doubt with a strong tinge of anger and/or skepticism. Most Christians the world over are anxiously awaiting the return of Jesus, but Jesus ain't coming back. Please spend a few minutes here to find out where in the Bible this is foretold and what it really says. Please don't just offhandedly dismiss this claim. Oddly enough, I'm only telling you this because I love you and want you to know the truth. Why do I make this claim? Well, one of several reasons I make this startling claim follows. After I review those proofs, I'll reveal a surprise, secret reason for this claim. Let's go to the book of Matthew, chapter 24, verses 3 through 5. Quote, As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? Meaning, when will he return? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Jesus answered, Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. End quote. Simply put, Jesus the Christ stated here that when the Messiah returns, he will not be named Jesus or use the divine name of Christ. There are also other proofs that when the Messiah returns, he will be in a different human body, having a different given name, not Jesus. The new Messiah will also have a different divine name that will not be either Christ or Son of God. Therefore, if someone claims to be Jesus himself, you will know immediately that he or she is most definitely not the returned Christ. Next, just a brief discussion to answer this question. What is a Messiah? It is brief and helps to set the stage for giving a few more proofs that Jesus is not coming back. In the Old Testament, the term Anointed One is used to refer to the Messiah, the manifestation of God who God would send to humanity to spiritually save us from ourselves. The Hebrew term for Anointed One is shown in the first row here and is pronounced Mashiach. Below that is the Greek term for the Anointed One, which is pronounced Christos. Now these two terms, Mashiach and Christos, would later be in English the word Messiah, derived from Mashiach, and the word Christ, derived from the Greek Christos. Thus, Messiah means the Anointed One, which in turn means Christ, and Christ means Messiah, which means the Anointed One, and the Anointed One means Christ, which also means Messiah, etc. This is just an annoying way of emphasizing that the terms Christ, Anointed One, and Messiah all mean the same divine spirit that God periodically sends to humankind. Just a wee bit of history here regarding the English language. Some important facts, since so many Christians only accept the King James Version of the Bible, one of the earliest versions of the Bible in English. When Jesus walked the earth and afterwards, when his teachings were recorded, mostly in Koine Greek, the English language did not yet exist. The earliest form of what we now call the English language came into being in the 5th century Common Era around the year 450 Common Era. But we modern English speakers would not understand much of this early English. The King James Version of the Bible was published in the year 1611, about 1,000 years after the first stage of the development of the English language began. The King James Version was written during the time that the Elizabethan English was in use. Note that Shakespeare also wrote his works in Elizabethan English. I only mention this because so many Christians kind of assume that the King James Version, English language version of the Bible is sacred somehow, as if Jesus himself spoke English. There is no logical reason for this belief. The original writings that formed the New Testament were written in Koine Greek with some Aramaic language influence. Greek was the literary language in common use at that time, even though the people in Jesus' place and time spoke Hebrew and Aramaic, and the Roman Empire was in political and military control of the area. Now we'll get back to our discussion about what a Messiah is. A Messiah is a manifestation of God, housed in a human body while on our earth. Messiah means anointed one, as we previously discussed. The term Messiah is peculiar to Judaism and Christianity. Messiah is a divine Savior who comes to humanity to bring spiritual teachings from God. But Messiah is not just for Jews and Christians. Manifestations of God, also known as capital P prophets, that's divine messengers, and some other terms, are sent by God to various times, places, and peoples on the planet. Thus we have religions such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Islam, etc. For clarity, these other prophets are also spiritual saviors from God for the period, place, and peoples to which they were sent by God. Manifestations of God are the daysprings of God's command, the treasuries of his revelation, and the repositories of his knowledge. They are not incarnations of God, but are rather manifestations of the attributes of God, and they all have a dual nature. Which leads to the question, what is meant by saying these manifestations of God have a dual nature? These beings, who are manifestations of God, also called prophets with a capital P, messengers of God, and similar terms, have two natures. One is human, depicted here by a clip art human. The other is the divine spirit, depicted by a bright light with emanations of light from that source, symbolizing the invisible divine spirit. So each manifestation of God, such as Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and others, all had both a human nature and the divine spirit nature. We humans have only the human nature. Next, I'll explain what I mean by saying prophet with a capital P. Just a little side note here on what capital P prophets are, as opposed to small p or small case p prophets. Capital P prophets are sent by God to spiritually educate humanity on spiritual truths that we humans cannot discover by ourselves. Capital P prophets are manifestations of God, not incarnations of God into a human body. They should be thought of as perfect, unblemished mirrors who perfectly reflect the attributes of God to us humans. That's why we humans tend to think of them as God on earth, but they are not, technically. Manifestations of God, meaning capital P prophets, come to establish divine laws appropriate for that time, place, and people to which they are sent by God. Each provides a book in which his teachings and laws are recorded, for example, the Torah, the Gospels, and the Quran. Again, a capital P prophet is the same thing as a manifestation of God, and vice versa. Here's a list of some capital P prophets or manifestations of God from our past history. Abraham, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and some others. Conversely, small p prophets are not originators of revelations of God, but rather are the promulgators of it or promoters of it, those who spread the word that a capital P prophet brings from God. Examples of that are people such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, Daniel, John of Patmos, and many others we know of from the Old Testament. Note that this differentiation between capital P versus small case p prophets in this video is my perspective on the different kinds of prophets. Various Bible versions may or may not differentiate between different kinds of prophets, but I follow this rule here in my videos. So back to our topic of the dual nature of manifestations of God, those capital P prophets we just spoke about. Looking at the attributes of humans, all of us humans have these properties. We have physical material bodies capable of being touched and seen by others, obviously not seen by people who are blind. As material bodies, we need food, water, sleep, safe shelter, and other such material needs. We are physically created and ultimately physically die to this world. This physical body organically disintegrates after death. We all have an invisible human soul that is associated with our human body. That association ends when the human body dies. Then the soul enters the spiritual realm, which is invisible to our human eyes. Of course, some of the watchers of this video may dispute this claim, as science cannot yet prove the existence of the invisible soul. Then there's the divine spirit. The divine spirit has no beginning and no end. This is referred to in the book of Revelation as the Alpha and the Omega. It's also known as the Word or the Word of God. As the term implies, it is a non-material spirit that cannot be seen by the human eye. Some humans have spirits or souls that are so attuned to the spiritual side of life that they may have the ability to sense or recognize the divine spirit in what looks like an ordinary human, such as Abraham, Moses, Jesus, etc. But those who lack this spirit sensitivity may never recognize it. This divine spirit becomes associated with a human body at some point by the will of God when He periodically sends a manifestation of His will to us to teach us spiritual lessons. Note that this chosen body, human body, becomes the vehicle, the tool of the divine spirit during its sojourn among us humans. But that human body is the same as any other human body. It eats, drinks, sleeps, feels pain, bleeds when injured, and dies. The divine spirit does not have these material infirmities and does not die. It is eternal. Here we have a human on the left and the divine spirit on the right. The human shown here does not have a divine spirit associated with it. The divine spirit on the right does not have a human body yet associated with it. But here we symbolically have one of those human bodies chosen to be a manifestation of God by God Himself. This manifestation of God has both the human side and the divine spirit side or nature, symbolized by the fusion here of our graphic human body and the bright light symbolizing the divine spirit. We'll call this one Jesus the Christ. Jesus was His human given name. Christ, from the Greek word Christos, meaning anointed one, anointed by God, is His divine name. Another divine name of His is the Son of God. But of course, to the eyes of other human beings, this is all they see with their human eyes, meaning no outward showing of the presence of the divine spirit. Here are some facts to consider in this matter. The case for the humanness of Jesus' body is that He was born in a known place, Bethlehem, and according to Matthew chapter 2 verse 1, He was born to a human mother, Mary. His earthly material body died on the cross. On the right, some biblical proof of Jesus having a divine spirit in addition to his human nature, per John chapter 6, verse 38. And Christ is speaking here, quote, "For I came down from heaven, not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me." End quote. So this was the Christ Spirit speaking through Jesus, describing where the Spirit comes from, heaven, the spiritual realm. And by the way, heaven is not from the sky. Then in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, this quote of Paul speaking of Christ, quote, "Christ is the image of God," end quote. Note that it does not state Jesus is the image of God, but rather that Christ is, meaning the divine spirit associated with the body of Jesus was made in the image of God, not the physical body of Jesus. It is stated in the book of John, chapter 4, verse 24, that God is a spirit, meaning not material. Therefore, it was the divine spirit associated with the body of Jesus that was made in the image of God, not the physical body of the human named Jesus. But with the crucifixion of Jesus, the divine spirit, the Christ nature, was released to be in the world of the spirit, out of our material world of earth. The Jesus human part died on the cross and ultimately organically disintegrated into the realm of the material world, never to return. But the divine spirit, referred to in the New Testament as the Spirit, survived in the spiritual realm and will return in a different human body chosen by God. To reiterate, the Christ Spirit would return, but not Jesus, that is, the human body born of a human mother, would never return. This verse from 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18 verifies this view. Quote, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit." End quote. Not convinced of this just because of one proof that you can choose to ignore? Well, I have additional proofs to reveal to you. Please come along with me to find out more. Here I have listed some additional proofs for you to consider about my claim that Jesus will never return. The second proof, after the one we just reviewed, is Jesus Christ's explanation of Elijah. It's called Elias in some Bible versions. The third, Jesus clearly referred to this person he foretold would come as the advocate or comforter as he, not I. Jesus said he would come, not I or me. Fourth, Christ stated he'd have a new name when he returns. Fifth, the book of Revelation and other books of the Bible explicitly reveal what this new name will be, in a sneaky, concealed kind of way. Hopefully you'll find number 5 here intriguing, so that you'll keep watching to find out what that name is. And the last proof, number 6, that I'll reveal to you is a surprise one. The plan of this video, the table of contents so to speak, is that I'll be reviewing these additional proofs, number 2 through 5, in more detail. Then after explaining number 2 through 5, I have a big surprise proof for you. That's the secret surprise I mentioned before that you just should not miss. You will be seeing this teal-colored background slide several times as we go through the remaining proofs of the claim that Jesus will never return. After I've finished presenting each proof of this claim, I'll check it off the list. So, number 1 proof is now checked off since we've just finished discussing the warning that Jesus gave about false prophets coming in his name. In the upper right corner, you can see a tiny version of the list of proofs that you just saw on the previous slide. The big number 2 next to this tiny menu shows that the second proof, that is Christ's explanation of Elijah, is the next proof I'll be presenting. and this proof is revealed to us from the disagreement between John the Baptist and Jesus Christ about the prophet Elijah. To understand this proof, you need to understand that when John the Baptist and then Jesus were teaching the people asked both Jesus and John the Baptist about whether John the Baptist was the prophet Elijah returned. The answers that Jesus and John gave were quite divergent. One said no, and the other one said yes. But why would the people at that time be asking about Elijah, the prophet of old, who lived about 900 years before the birth of Jesus? The people of the time were asking this question because the book of Malachi, chapter 4, verse 5 states, quote, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes." End quote. The phrase day of the Lord is referring to the appearance of the Messiah in the world. So Malachi, speaking from a vision from God, states that God, that's the I in the quote, God will send Elijah as a sign that the Messiah is soon to appear. Meaning that Elijah will be the herald or forerunner of the Messiah before he appears. The people were aware of this prophecy, so they had reason to expect that if Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah, then Elijah had to have come before him, or Jesus could not be the Messiah. Therefore, no Elijah, no Messiah, and that would mean that Jesus was a false Messiah. Therefore, Christ needed to explain this to the people. John the Baptist traveled the countryside leading up to the time that Jesus professed that he, Jesus, was the greatly anticipated Messiah the Jews expected. John was proclaiming the imminent appearance of the Messiah in fulfillment of the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 3 and 4, and pleading with people to repent and prepare for the appearance of the Messiah. This is reflected in the statement about John the Baptist in the book of Mark, chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, quote, "The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. John did baptize in the wilderness and preach the baptism of repentance for the remission of sins." End quote. Knowing these prophecies in the books of Malachi and Isaiah, the people asked Jesus Christ if John was Elijah. Jesus said yes, John was indeed Elijah, but John said he was not Elijah. Here we see two quotes to show this dispute, one might call it. First, we see from Matthew chapter 11, verses 14 and 15, quoting Jesus as he was responding to the people who were questioning if John was Elijah, quote, "And if you are willing to accept it, he," meaning John the Baptist, "is the Elijah who was to come. Whoever has ears, let them hear." End quote. Then in the book of John, chapter 1, verse 21, at the bottom here, in response to that same question of whether he, John, was the prophet Elijah returned, quote, John is responding, "And they asked him, What then? Art thou Elias," or Elijah? And he saith, I am not. Art thou that prophet? And he answered, No. End quote. That leaves us with this question. Who was telling the truth and who was lying? Was Jesus lying by saying John was the return of the prophet Elijah? Or was John lying by saying he wasn't Elijah? Obviously, they were both telling the truth. But you ask, how can they both be telling the truth? Either John was Elijah or he was not. Jesus was stating that the spiritual attributes of the prophet Elijah were manifest in the person of John the Baptist. By the will of God, the spirit or attributes of Elijah were manifested in the human body of John the Baptist. Thus, an illustration of how God can return spiritual entities to our material world through manifesting the spiritual attributes of one entity into another human body, symbolically returning rather than literally. That's why John said he was not Elijah, quite truthfully. John was not the past human body of Elijah, but he was fulfilling the functions of Elijah, thus Christ's statement that John was Elijah. With that explanation of how people from the past are returned in spiritual ways, we have completed another proof, proof number 2 on our list. So now number 2 is checked off. We march on to proof number 3, how Jesus explains the appearance of another one like himself, who he referred to as the Advocate, or in some Bible translations, the Comforter, also called the Spirit of Truth. In the book of John, chapter 14, verses 16 and 17, Jesus Christ states the following, quote, "And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of Truth," end quote. Note that in the King James Version it states he shall give you another comforter rather than advocate. Same thing, another manifestation of God. Note Christ says another rather than speaking of his return. And then in John chapter 16, Jesus goes on to tell about the Advocate, the Comforter, and the Spirit of Truth, all the same entity. And by the way, I'll just be referring to it as just the Spirit of Truth from now on. Anyway, he'll be telling about this Spirit of Truth who will come in the future and what he'll do. Again, this is from the book of John, chapter 16, verses 12 through 16. And Jesus is talking here, quote, "I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear. But when he, the Spirit of Truth, comes, he will guide you into all the truth. He will not speak on his own. He will speak only what he hears, and he will tell you what is yet to come. He will glorify me, because it is from me that he will receive what he will make known to you. All that belongs to the Father is mine. That is why I said the Spirit will receive from me what he will make known to you." End quote. If we count the number of references to the words he, his, and himself, references to the Spirit of Truth to come in the future, and then the words I, me, mine, references to Jesus himself, we can see that there are nearly 2 times as many times Jesus mentions he, his, or himself as there are Jesus talking about himself by saying I, me, or mine. Rather solid proof that this Spirit of Truth to come in the future would be someone other than himself, Jesus. This relentless differentiation Jesus made between himself and the future Spirit of Truth coming is thus another proof that the physical body and persona of Jesus will not be returning. Therefore, that proof number 3 is checked off our list here. We will now delve into proof number 4. Another ingredient in this conclusion that Jesus is never coming back is that the Christ stated in 2 places in the New Testament that he would have a new name when he returns. These 2 places are 2 verses in the book of Revelation, specifically in chapters 2 and 3, which contain the 7 letters to the angels of the 7 churches. The book of Revelation? Uh-oh, you may be thinking. If you have been taught that this book of the Bible is not reliable or understandable, with all its strange passages about beasts, dragons, and bowls of wrath, among other things, you might wonder about the book of Revelation as a source of reliable information. This distrust that some have of the book of Revelation seems to come from, number 1, people never reading Revelation and or just accepting the dismissal of this book as it's being irrelevant, or worse, a Christian acquaintance of mine refuses to even read it because she's so fearful of its contents. Or number 2, Some people dismiss it because they have read it and don't understand it at all because of some of the seemingly bizarre and illogical text and imagery. Or number three, people have been misled to believe incorrect interpretations of it, which has led to fear of the book. So you might tend to dismiss this book entirely. Please do not ignore it. The book of Revelation is actually a very logical book and is a spiritual gift to us. You just have to know what it means. Next, I want to spend just a wee bit of time on the background of this often maligned and misinterpreted book of the Bible. The most important thing to know is that the book of Revelation is about God's next manifestations of himself, meaning prophets, divine messengers, among other terms, that will come in the future, especially including the return of the Messiah. There are lots of people who say it's about the Emperor Nero or the Roman Empire or other empires or political events or movements in the world. Some worldly events are touched upon in the book, but only as they affect the prime objective of its giving us clues as to these upcoming divine messengers, manifestations of God, including the reappearance of the Christ Spirit. The book of Revelation was authored by a man called John of Patmos. John was an elderly Christian man who was living on an island named Patmos off the coast of present-day Turkey. It's actually a Greek island. He was banished there by the Roman authorities to put an end to his teaching Christianity to the people. Some experts believe that this John of Patmos was the Apostle John, a disciple of Christ, although there is no evidence of this one way or another. This elderly John received visions from an unearthly spirit of Christ, unearthly since Jesus had died on the cross decades before this time. The year 95 AD is thought to be when this vision occurred and was first written down. Note that the disciple John was a very young man when Jesus Christ was on earth, so chronologically it is possible that this old man named John was indeed the disciple John. The book of Revelation was written in the Koine Greek language that was prevalent around the year 95 AD. At the end of the book, Jesus Christ refers to himself as the Alpha and the Omega, meaning both in the beginning and in the end, meaning eternal. Note that the Greek alphabetical character alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet. It's in the lower left corner. And omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet. That's the one next to it. These two symbols are often combined to mean alpha and omega, similar to what you see in the lower right. If you want to know more about the book of Revelation, please watch my video on YouTube titled Revelation Revealed on my channel, which is named, that's on the bottom right there, Integral Destiny 9, all one word with the number 9 at the end. This video, Revelation Revealed, gives an overall view of Revelation, explains how it is constructed, which is essential to know, by the way, and the meaning of many words and concepts. It includes a primer on the beasts of Revelation and a detailed look at chapters 11, 12, and 13 because they are the keys to truly understand the book of Revelation. Here's a list of many of my other videos on Bible prophecy fulfillment. I've circled in red all those videos that cover topics from the book of Revelation. The mentioned main video, Revelation Revealed, is on the left, second from the top. Then there's Armageddon is Over, 7 Letters to 7 Churches, 666 Explained, Mark of the Beast, 144,000. Then top right, the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Pause the video to review them to see if any might be of interest to you, but please finish this video first. Now, back to our topic. These 7 letters are addressed to these churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. The first sentence of each of the 7 letters is shown here. These letters are all addressed to the angel of that church. For example, in chapter 2, verse 1, at the beginning of the first letter to the church of Ephesus, it states, quote, "To the angel of the church of Ephesus write," end quote. And then the text of the letter to that church follows. Then for the next letter in chapter 2, verse 8, about that church, it says the same thing, quote, "To the angel of the church of Smyrna write," end quote. It's the same thing for each of those 7 churches or religions. There are 7 different angels to whom these letters are written. So, who are those angels? The angel of each of the faiths is the prophet of God or manifestation of God who brought that revelation to humanity. Each angel of each church, meaning religion of God, is entered into the middle column here. So, the angel of the church of Ephesus, that's number 1 at the top, that angel was Abraham. Yes, Abraham was a prophet. The Bible states this in Genesis chapter 20, verses 6 and 7. At the time of John of Patmos, who received this vision we know as the book of Revelation, there were still people who were monotheists in the Middle East, but who were not Jewish. Many were remnants of the followers of the religion of Abraham. Some believed the Sabaeans were some of these people. At the time of Muhammad, these non-Jewish, non-Christian monotheists were referred to as Hanif or Hanifa. The angel of the church of Smyrna, that's number 2, was Moses. Note that in the far right column is the religion this angel Moses founded, meaning Judaism. The angel of Pergamos was Krishna, and his church or faith is the Hindu faith. Thyatira is Zoroaster, meaning Zarathustra, and his Zoroastrian faith. Then Sardis, its angel is Buddha, founder of the Buddhist faith. Philadelphia's angel, Jesus Christ, founder of Christianity. Then for the 7th church, Laodicea, the religion that did not yet exist at the time of John of Patmos, its angel Muhammad and his faith of Islam. So this 7th letter is to the future faith of Islam, the future to John of Patmos, who is writing this vision down around the year 95 AD or Common Era. If you are in shock that I mentioned that Muhammad was a prophet of God, don't be. The prophet Muhammad was foretold in several books of the Bible. The leadership of Islam was seriously damaged by the actions of 2 of the 3 bad beasts of the book of Revelation, but the Holy Quran was protected from this damage. The effects of the 2 beasts skewed the appearance of Islam to the outside world. Learn about it in this video titled, oddly enough, The Prophet Muhammad Foretold in the Bible, on my YouTube channel named Integral Destiny 9. You can see that at the bottom right. Now, to be perfectly clear, the Prophet Muhammad was foretold in the books of Genesis, Daniel, and Revelation, and a few other mentions elsewhere in the Bible. But Muhammad was not the foretold Lamb or he who sits on the throne in the book of Revelation. Muhammad was not the return of the Messiah that would follow his revelation. Now back to the letters to the churches or religions of God. You may be wondering what could possibly be the purpose of these letters. Remember, the purposes of the book of Revelation is to foretell past, present, and mostly future events. The 7 letters to the churches are warnings about future events leading up to the appearance of the Messiah of the latter days, a time we are now living in, by the way, the latter days. It needs to be understood that John's vision was intended to be understood only in the future, when the knowledge of the other peoples and faiths on earth were known. The intent was to keep the real meanings hidden until around the time of the return of the Messiah. Think of the book of Daniel and how often the entities giving Daniel his visions repeatedly told him to seal up the visions so that they would not be understood until the time of the end, meaning until the latter days, also known as the last days, meaning when the Messiah of the latter days, the returned Christ Spirit, would appear. What were these letters intended to accomplish, and why are they at the beginning of the book of Revelation? The 5 objectives or purposes of each of the 7 letters are to tell that these 7 faith communities to which the letters were addressed that each is in danger of displeasing God from their condition and corrupted teachings and practices by the followers of each faith. To warn them to correct their church or religious observances as mentioned in the letter addressed to them. To remind humanity that God will send another manifestation of God, the Christ Spirit returned. And to warn that faith which does not correct its ways is in danger of missing the new manifestation of God for the latter days and will stray further from God's pleasure. Unless they reform and refine themselves, they will not be in a spiritual condition that will allow them to recognize this new manifestation of God. And to tell humanity that the returned Messiah will have a new name, thus his followers will have a new name too, just as Christianity gets its name from Jesus the Christ, and Buddhists gets theirs from Buddha. One thing in common in all 7 letters is that they each end with a warning to the members of that religion. Like this warning at the end of letter number 3 to the Church of Pergamos. That's in Revelation chapter 2, verse 17, quote, "Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it." End quote. Now, in some versions of the Bible, it says to the one who is victorious. But in the King James Version and some others, it is worded, "To him that overcometh, I will give some of the hidden manna." And the meaning of this warning? Christ is warning that when he returns, the followers of that particular faith should heed his warnings, or they will not be able to recognize the promised one of their faith. Meaning the Christ returned will be the fulfillment of the prophecies of a promised one in that faith. Thus, the promised one of all the religions of earth, since this warning is contained in and common to all 7 letters. However, the Christ returned will not be called Jesus or Christ or any of the previous names. This new messenger of God will have a new name. The book of Revelation tells us so in the letters to the churches. This is stated specifically in chapter 2, verse 17, and chapter 3, verse 12. Here is the 2nd verse, where Christ foretells that he will have a new name when the Christ Spirit returns in a new human physical body. You've already seen the other one from chapter 2, verse 17. Here is the Revelation chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. Quote, "The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Note that the green circled area states that the one who is victorious, or as it states in the King James Version of the Bible, him that overcometh, the Messiah will make a pillar in the temple of my God. The Messiah will make that person or those of this religion who are victorious over the spiritual deficiencies in their religion, as pointed out by Christ to that church in that letter, a pillar in the temple of God. In other words, they reform and refine themselves of past spiritual difficulties. Then if they recognize the new Messiah, the new manifestation of God, they will become the a part of the foundation and structure of this new revelation from God. It is mentioned that if this church or religion, if their followers thereof are victorious, then good things will happen. But what is meant by victorious? Victorious over what? What was to be overcome in the term used in the King James Version? Does it mean victorious over other people? Over other nations? Over other faiths? Does this victory come from war or violence of any kind? Are they overcoming a worldly enemy of some sort? These victories are none of these, but rather it means victories over their own selves and problems within their faiths. These victories mean the reform of corrupted teachings and practices within the faith, going back to the pure original teachings of their angel, their prophet. In other words, overcoming changes in their faith made by humans, back to the original teachings of their prophets of God, who originated their faith. That is, spiritual victories, and who they overcome are themselves, their worldly desires. Culminating in spiritual enlightenment and purification, which will allow faith followers to recognize the new manifestation of God and to follow and obey Him. All of the past manifestations or prophets of God had their given names, those their families gave them at their births, but their divine spirits each had, as a part of their dual nature, they had special divine names specific to each. At the top left is Abraham. Of course, his given name was originally Abram. God asked him to change it to Abraham. But his divine name, as you see to the right there, the friend of God. Moses, his given name was Moses. His divine names included he who converses with God and the servant of God. The divine names of Jesus include the Son of God and the Spirit or Spirit of God. Muhammad's divine names include the Apostle of God and the Seal of the Prophets. Then at the bottom we now know that someone with a new given name and a new divine name are foretold. Therefore, all the question marks in those spaces. Now we know that the foretold Savior foretold in all these faiths for the end times, also known as the latter days or last days, will not have any of the past given names and divine names. Also recall that Christ said when he would return, that he'd return as the thief in the night. As a detective on this case, trying to find this thief, you will have a difficult task because the returned Christ Spirit will have an entirely new identity. Anyway, back to where we started with these two quotes from the book of Revelation, wherein the Christ Spirit is telling John of Patmos that when he returns, that is, the Christ Spirit returns, he will have a new name. In the quote at the top, he's stating that he'll give his followers, when he returns, a new name. How would he give them a new name? Through the fact that he himself will have a new name. Just as Christians are named after Christ, the followers of the returned Messiah will be named after him at that time. This is more directly stated in the quote at the bottom, where it states, quote, "And I will also write on them my new name," end quote. So now we added Christ's assurance that he'd have a new name when he returns. The return of Christ, not the return of Jesus. Again, we know that Jesus won't be coming back because the returned Messiah will have a new body and a new given name and a new divine name as well. Now we are at proof number 5. The Bible not only tells us that the Messiah of the latter days will have a new name, it even gives us what that new name will be. Get your anticipation working. What is it? How could anyone have missed it up to this time? Okay, Get ready. It is the glory of God, the glory of God, or the glory of the Lord. This name, the glory of God or the glory of the Lord, is sprinkled throughout the Bible in both the Old and New Testaments. It's not always clear that the phrase glory of God or glory of the Lord is in reference to a special being, especially a being that can be seen by ordinary humans because it's housed in a human body. But it is very clear in numerous books and verses, especially after you realize what the real intent of references to that name of Messiah of the Latter Days really means. Let's review some of these verses. From the book of Isaiah, chapter 35, verse 2, quote, "The excellency of Carmel and Sharon, they shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God," end quote. Elsewhere in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 5, quote, "And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of God hath spoken it," end quote. In Isaiah again, chapter 60, verses 1 and 16, quote, "Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. I, the Lord, am thy Savior and thy Redeemer," end quote. And in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1, verse 28, quote, "The appearance of the glory of the Lord, and when I saw it, I fell upon my face," end quote. In Ezekiel chapter 43, verse 4, in speaking of the one who would come in the latter days, quote, "And behold, the glory of God of Israel came from the way of the east," end quote. And in the book of Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, quote, "The glory of the Lord shall be thy reward," end quote. In the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 27, quote, "For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father," end quote. The term his Father here means God. Thus, this verse is saying, "For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of God." Then in John chapter 11, verse 40, quote, "Then Jesus said, Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" End quote. In the book of Acts, chapter 7, verse 55, quote, "But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God," end quote. Please note that the writer, who was probably the Apostle Luke, is clearly differentiating between something or someone he calls the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. It does not state the glory of God, comma, Jesus, comma, standing next to God, but rather the glory of God and Jesus standing next to God, hence two separate identities. Next, the book of Revelation, chapters 2 and 23. Note that a small snippet from chapter 2 is included simply to explain what the city is that is mentioned later in verse 23. Quote, "And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, and the city had no need of the sun, for the glory of God did lighten it," end quote. Also in the book of Revelation, in chapter 15, verse 8, quote, "And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one could enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were completed," end quote. Also note in the book of Luke, chapter 9, verse 26, quote, "For whomever is ashamed of me and my words, of him the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes, number 1, first, in his own glory, and number 2, second, in his Father's glory, and of the holy angels," end quote. The reason I broke down this verse into its 2 segments here was to emphasize that Christ is saying that 2 manifestations of God will appear in the future. The divine Spirit will appear in 2 persons at that time. The first time he'll come in his, Christ's own glory. Then the second time in the Father's, meaning in the Father's glory. That's why I've added the word glory in brackets here to clarify what is meant. Let's look more closely at the in his Father's glory phrase. It's equivalent to in God's glory, which is equivalent to in the glory of God. Thus, once again, we see that the glory of God shall come. This verse of Luke is telling us that two manifestations of God, also known as capital P, prophets of God, will come in the future. Both will be the return of the Christ Spirit, the divine Spirit. First, the Christ Spirit will return as the Elijah figure, a herald or forerunner to the yet-to-come returned Messiah. Then, the Messiah of the latter days will appear, the second appearance of that divine Spirit, this time as the Messiah that we already know from Luke chapter 9, verse 26, is the glory of God who will come. These verses we just reviewed are another proof that the returning Christ Spirit will have a different, new name and new identity from those of the past. Now you know what that name would be: the glory of God. The hidden name of the returned Christ Spirit is revealed, and you are one of the few, so far, privileged to know it. So we'll check off that proof in our list here. Now you are ready for the surprise proof that the person of Jesus is never coming back, and that a person with a new name will be the returned Christ Spirit. Get ready for it. When I open this surprise gift, you will be amazed. The glory of God has come. He lived from 1817 to 1892 in the Middle East, and yes, his divine name was the glory of God. In Arabic, his divine name is Baha'u'llah. This is the shrine of Baha'u'llah, the final resting place of his mortal remains. It is located outside of Akka or Akko, Israel. That city is also known from the past as Acre. And this is the faith that resulted from his life, his teachings, and his new covenant, the Baha'i Faith. This is a worldwide faith community that currently has from 7 to 10 million members. An exact number of members is not quite crystal clear because of the persecution of its members in some nations. There are about 170,000 Baha'is in the USA. Here you see 8 Baha'i Faith continental houses of worship in the world, one on each of the continents except Antarctica, but including one representing all the Pacific Islands. If we start at the top left, that is the house of worship or temple in Santiago, Chile. To its right is the house of worship located in Wilmette, Illinois, just north of Chicago, next to Lake Michigan. Then the one in Samoa, representing the Pacific Islands as a whole. Then the temple in New Delhi, India, often referred to as the Lotus Temple because it's designed to look like a lotus flower. Bottom left, the temple outside of Sydney, Australia. To its right, the house of worship in Germany, representing the European continent. Next, the temple in Uganda, representing the continent of Africa. And last, bottom right, is the temple in Panama, in Central America. As a new faith, beginning in 1844, establishment of temples, shrines, and other structures was embarked upon from its earliest times. But the faith is only about 179 years old, and as you can see, it is truly worldwide in scope. Note that a Baha'i house of worship or temple is required to have 9 sides and entrances, a dome structure, and it's set on a circular base. No statues or images are allowed inside or outside. I began by showing you these structures to illustrate that the Baha'i Faith is worldwide. There are devoted Baha'is in most nations on earth, and to help you understand that this new faith is the faith of the new Messiah God promised us down the ages. that is the real thing. Next, I'll briefly fill in some details. Remember how it was stated that two manifestations of God would appear? The herald or forerunner, the Elijah figure, and the Messiah of the latter days, the returned Christ Spirit. The herald of the coming of the Messiah was a young man whose divine name was the Bab. The name the Bab means the gate in English. The spiritual meaning of the gate is that it is opened for the entry of God's children into the garden of his faith to meet the Messiah for the new era, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. Now for a short history of the Bab. He was born in 1819 in Shiraz, Persia. At the age of 25, he proclaimed his station as the expected Mahdi and the herald to the promised Messiah to the Christians and Jews, who the Bab referred to as him whom God shall make manifest, who he said would soon appear. His proclamation of his identity was made on May 22, 1844, in Shiraz, Persia, at 2 hours after sunset. The Bab taught his revelation from God for 6 years and accrued the devotion of thousands of devoted followers, some say in the hundreds of thousands. The Bab taught his revelation from God for 6 turbulent years, all the while spreading the word that a manifestation of God greater than he would soon appear in fulfillment of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim expectations of a Savior to appear in the latter days. The Bab had 18 disciples, including a woman. These disciples were called the Letters of the Living. The last 3 years of his ministry were spent in prison in the Persian government's attempts to put an end to the Bab and his followers, who were called Babis. You see the pronunciation guide there, again pronounced Babis. The singular noun is Babi. Ultimately, the Shah and his Grand Vizier arranged for his killing after their failure to contain the Bab's growing numbers of devotees. On July 9, 1850, an army regiment of 750 rifles aimed their rifles at the Bab and fired. When the smoke from the rifles cleared, the Bab was gone. The ropes that bound him had miraculously been severed by the bullets. A search found the Bab back in his cell finishing some correspondence, a task that had been interrupted by his would-be executioners. The 1st Regiment refused to conduct another attempt. They were replaced by another Persian Army regiment. Again, 750 rifles aimed and fired. This time the bullets riddled his body, but not his face. And at noon on July 9, 1850, a manifestation of God was again put to death by the people he was sent to spiritually elevate. This event, by the way, was witnessed by thousands, including some Europeans. The events of the day, including the failed first attempt with its miraculous disappearance of the Bab, was reported in some European newspapers. The Bab's body was hidden by his followers for decades in Persia. The unrelenting persecution of the Babis made this necessary. Then it was secretly moved to Palestine, as it was known at that time, and a building built to house his remains. Through the years, a golden-domed superstructure was built above the foundation building. You see it here. The shrine of the Bab is located on the side of Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel. Now let's go back and fill in a little bit more about Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, Messiah for the latter days. Baha'u'llah was born in Tehran, Persia in 1817. He became a follower of the Bab after reading some of the Bab's writings. It's interesting to note that the Bab and Baha'u'llah never actually met physically on this earthly plane of existence. Due to the persecution of the Babis, especially after the martyrdom of the Bab in 1850, Baha'u'llah, as one of the Bab's chief disciples, was imprisoned in the Black Pit prison in Tehran. This Black pit prison called the Sia Shal was a subterranean dungeon filled with filth. Virtually no light reached the occupants, of which there were well over 100 criminals and other prisoners of the crown. Baha'u'llah was draped with a chain that weighed over 100 pounds over his shoulders. He was imprisoned in the Black Pit prison from August to December of 1852. During his imprisonment in the Black Pit prison, Baha'u'llah received a revelation from God telling him that he was the entity that the Bab had foretold as coming, him whom God shall make manifest. Baha'u'llah did not reveal this spiritual elevation and revelation to him for about 10 years after its occurrence in late 1852. The Shah's government confiscated all his properties and wealth just for being a follower of the Bab. Then the Shah had Baha'u'llah and his family exiled to Baghdad, which was under the authority of the Ottoman Empire. This map of the Middle East shows the exile travels of Baha'u'llah, his family, and some fellow Babis. On this map, Persia is shown in the dark green, and the Ottoman Empire are the areas shaded in dark tan. Note that the borders shown on this map are modern-day ones superimposed on this map of the Middle East of the 1800s. Several of the national borders shown here on this map did not even exist in the 1800s. But it helps you get yourself situated where things are. The first exile started in Tehran in January of 1853. See Tehran on the right side of the map. Baha'u'llah, under Army Guard, traveled through Kermanshah, then to Baghdad. Baha'u'llah resided in Baghdad for about 10 years under the watchful eyes of the governor there for that area of the Ottoman Empire. Baha'u'llah spent 2 of those 10 years, from April 1854 to March of 1856, in a voluntary, solitary self-exile in the mountains of Sulaymaniyah in the Kurdish area of modern Iraq, to the northeast of Baghdad. Then in early 1863, an order was issued by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to move Baha'u'llah, his family, and close associates to Constantinople, principally due to the request by the Persian government to remove Baha'u'llah and the Babis further from Persia. Both the Persian government and the Muslim clergy of Persia wanted the Babis as far away from Persia as possible. In April of 1863, just before Baha'u'llah was forced to leave Baghdad, Baha'u'llah publicly declared for the first time his divine station and identity. From that day forward, those Babis who accepted Baha'u'llah as God's manifestation for the new era were called Baha'is, no longer Babis. The term Baha'i means follower of the glory. Baha'u'llah left Baghdad under guard in early May 1863. They traveled overland northwest to the Black Sea port of Samsun, where he, his family, and some companions were boarded onto a steamship to complete the final leg of their journey to Istanbul. They disembarked in Constantinople, now called Istanbul, on August 16, 1863. After a couple months, the Sultan wanted him and his small group of followers taken even further away from the seat of his government, so he exiled them to Adrianople, now called Edirne. Baha'u'llah and his group stayed in Edirne from late 1863 to August 21, 1868, when the Sultan banished him for life to the prison city of Acre, Palestine. That is also known as Acre, A-C-R-E, Palestine. They were boarded under guard of the Ottoman government onto a ship in Gallipoli, and after a couple stops along the coast of Egypt, they landed in the small coastal town of Haifa, Palestine, on August 31, 1868. There they were put onto a small sailboat and taken to the sea gate of the walled prison city of Acre. Baha'u'llah spent 40 years writing and teaching his revelation from God before he passed away in 1892. Please recall that you saw a photo of his shrine located outside of Akka at the beginning of this section of the video. Note that all these exiles of Baha'u'llah were ordered and enforced by either the Persian or the Ottoman governments, and were not of his own volition. Due to this history, the world center of the Baha'i Faith is located on Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel, across the bay from Akka. The Baha'i Faith was established in Haifa and Akka, Palestine area in the year 1868, some 80 years before the present nation of Israel was created in 1948. This is an aerial photo of the city of Akka. Apparently this photo was taken about the year 1940. Several decades after Baha'u'llah and his entourage arrived there. When Baha'u'llah was incarcerated there, those thick stone walls completely surrounded Akka, with only 2 gates in those walls to gain entry into the city, through the land gate or through the sea gate. Baha'u'llah and his group entered Akka through the sea gate. Akka was a formidable fortress at that time, nearly impossible to breach those walls from either land or sea. As you can see, trying to scale the walls from the sea would be a nearly impossible task. Now for a little history of this ancient city, named Akka, but also known as Acre, A-C-R-E, when the Crusaders occupied it. The Crusaders occupied it for 2 periods of time, from 1104 to 1187 Common Era, and then from 1191 to 1291, about 100 more years, for a total of 183 years. In the year 1291 Common Era, the Crusaders, who were occupying Acre at that time, lost a siege of the fortress to the Muslims. Historians consider this loss of Akka to the Muslims in 1291 as the end of the Crusades. Note the towers that some historians say that the fortress at Akka once had. It is theorized that they may have been damaged through centuries of bombardments of the city. There are no towers there now. It's interesting to note that from the year 1191 Common Era until the siege of Akka in 1291, the city of Akka was the capital of what was called the Kingdom of Jerusalem, established by the Crusaders. So for 100 years, it was its capital. The city of Jerusalem had been the capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem before that, until Jerusalem fell to the Muslim forces in 1187 Common Era. Then, some 508 years later, in the year 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte laid siege on Akka, or Acre, from March 21st through May 20th of that year, 1799. A full 2 months of attacks against those walls. He attacked the city from both land and sea, with no success. He gave up and retreated back to Egypt. The great Napoleon Bonaparte failed against those walls. In this old photo, you see the building called the Citadel, located inside the prison city of Akka. This building was where Baha'u'llah, his family, and some others were imprisoned in the upper floors for the first several years after their arrival in Akka. It appeared in this overgrown and derelict way probably in the early decades of the 1900s, and when Baha'u'llah and etc. were imprisoned there. After this period, Baha'u'llah was released from this building but placed under house arrest inside Akka for many years thereafter. He was allowed, after many more years, to leave Akka and move to nearby areas, but he was never permitted to leave the area of Akka to the end of his earthly life. He passed away in the year 1892. That's a total of 24 years in the Akka area under the control of the Ottoman Empire and not allowed to leave the area. In Psalm 60, David intones verses to beg God to not reject the Israelites. Verse 9 here states, "Who will bring me into the strong city?" is from a prayer of David's asking God to save and strengthen the Israelites. This explanation is according to a study Bible of the New International Version of the Bible, by the way. By David asking God, "Who will bring me into the strong city?" David is asking about the Messiah coming to save David's people. In Psalm 108, David reiterates this plea to God for help in the exact same phrase, "Who will bring me into the strong city?" Note at the bottom here that the term strong city is translated as fortified city in some versions of the Bible. Baha'u'llah himself wrote about Akka, specific to this clause in these two Psalms, 60 and 108. Quote, "Great is the cause and great the announcement. Patiently and calmly ponder thou the resplendent signs and the sublime words, and all that hath been revealed in these days, that haply thou mayest fathom the mysteries that are hid in the books, and mayest strive to guide his servants. Hearken with thine inner ear unto the voice of Jeremiah, who saith, O, for great is that day, and it hath no equal. Wert thou to observe with the eyes of fairness, thou wouldst perceive the greatness of the day. Incline thine ear unto the voice of this all-knowing counselor, and suffer not thyself to be deprived of the mercy that hath surpassed all created things, visible and invisible. Lend an ear unto the song of David. He saith, Who will bring me into the strong city? The strong city is Akka, which hath been named the most great prison, and which possesseth a fortress and mighty ramparts." End quote. A Bible prophecy fulfilled by the appearance of the Messiah of the latter days in the prison city of Akka. Akka, the strong city. Now, on to another prophecy in the Bible that Baha'u'llah fulfilled. That prophecy is in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 43, verses 1 through 7. Quote, "Then the man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. The vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and like the visions I had seen by the Kebar River. I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. While the man was standing beside me, I heard someone speaking to me from inside the temple. He said, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever." End quote. Now let's review those same verses with some terms highlighted that really tell the story of what this prophecy is saying. Quote, "Then the man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of God of Israel coming from the east." We have the divine name of the Bab, the gate, then the divine name of Baha'u'llah here, the glory of God. Note that it states that the gate is facing east, and that Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, is coming from the east. To summarize, this prophecy foretells that the Bab and Baha'u'llah will come to the Holy Land from the east of the Holy Land. Continuing to verses 4 through 7, there are two mentions of the glory of God, or the glory of the Lord, meaning Baha'u'llah, of course, and another mention of the gate, meaning the Bab, and it again says facing east, meaning the gate is situated toward the east. Then it states that the place of my throne, meaning the Messiah's throne, and the place for the soles of his feet, this is where he will live among the Israelites forever. Well, the soles of Baha'u'llah's feet trod the ground in and around Akka, Palestine, now Israel, including on Mount Carmel in Haifa. And his mortal remains are buried outside of Akka, very literally fulfilling the statement that he would be in the land of the Israelites forever. For short, this prophecy states that the Messiah of the latter days would come to the Holy Land from the east. Baha'u'llah proclaimed his divine identity as the manifestation of God for this new era in Baghdad in 1863. In effect, this great announcement in Baghdad made it official that he was the Messiah. The Messiah was foretold as coming to the northern part of ancient Israel. Baghdad is directly east of Akka, as the red arrow shows. Baha'u'llah just took a rather circuitous route to get to Baghdad to Akka, and remember, his exiles were out of his control. And you may remember that the Bab was killed in Persia, but his followers hid his body from the authorities until decades later they would sneak it out of Persia and take it to Mount Carmel in then Palestine. Baha'u'llah and the Bab fulfilled these prophecies. That's a proof that Baha'u'llah was who he said he was. Now, fulfillment of these few Bible prophecies of the appearances of the Elijah figure and the Messiah may not convince you that Baha'u'llah truly is the foretold return of Christ, the Messiah of the latter days, and the Bab his forerunner. But there is an enormous amount of evidence that they have fulfilled all the Bible prophecies of the coming of the latter-day Messiah's coming. Remember this table showing the given name and the divine names of past manifestations of God, also known as prophets of God? Abraham's divine name was the friend of God. Moses' divine names included he who converses with God and the servant of God. The divine names of Jesus included the Son of God and the Spirit or the Spirit of God. Muhammad's divine names included the Apostle of God and the Seal of the Prophets. Now I will show you the Bab and Baha'u'llah, how they fit in here. The Bab's given name that his family gave him was Ali Muhammad. His full name was Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi. The Sayyid preface is a title, not a name. It means that he was a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. Shirazi means he was from the city of Shiraz, Persia. The Bab's divine names are the Bab, or the Gate, of course, also the Most Exalted One, the Lamb of the Book of Revelation, the Returned Elijah, and Emmanuel, which is from a Hebrew prophecy of the coming of the herald of the Messiah. Emmanuel means God is with us. Baha'u'llah's family given name is Hussein Ali Nuri. The Nuri means that the family is from Nur, which is the area of Persia where his family was from. Baha'u'llah means the glory of God, as we know. His other divine names are Lord of Hosts, the Tree of Life, the great Prince Michael mentioned in the book of Daniel. The name Michael means who is like God, or a gift from God. Another divine name, he who sits on the throne, from the book of Revelation. And of course, Messiah of the latter days, and some other divine names too. Baha'u'llah passed on to the spiritual realm in 1892. This is his shrine, as you saw before. It's Baha'u'llah's final resting place, located outside of Akka or Akko, Israel. Now that you know these proofs that have been reviewed here, and that Baha'u'llah is the glory of God foretold throughout the Bible, and especially in the book of Revelation, you should be able to understand why the physical body and persona of Jesus is truly never going to return, and that the Messiah Spirit or Christ Spirit will come back, just not in the person or persona of Jesus. Here's that list again of the 6 proofs we just reviewed. They are 6 of many, many proofs, the most important being the bottom one, the surprise one, that the Christ Spirit has already visited us in the person of Baha'u'llah. We are finished with those proofs, but Now that you know what the surprise proof is, that the Messiah Spirit has returned already in the 1800s as Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, if you want to be true to Jesus Christ, you will act upon that knowledge and thoroughly investigate these claims. After all, Christ told you to watch for him. To watch means to investigate the evidence. It means it's your spiritual duty to investigate the lives and characters of the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and the other chief persons in this drama. As it says in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, verses 22 and 43, shown here, that Christians must keep watch for the day of the Lord, meaning the return of the Messiah. Both these verses warn Christians to always be watchful for the Messiah's return. However, you already know that the Messiah has returned. So does that end your Christian responsibility to watch, meaning to investigate? Here's yet another verse regarding Christ's warning from Mark chapter 13, verses 35 through 37, from a parable that Jesus told his followers. Quote, "Watch ye therefore, for ye know not when the master of the house cometh, at even, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch." End quote. But think about this. What about the person who is sleeping when the Master, meaning the Messiah, comes? He would eventually awake and go about his life not knowing about the Master's return, unless someone tells him, that is. And when told that the Master has returned, should he instantly reject that claim? Or should he investigate to verify the Master's return before dismissing it out of hand? Then there's this from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 2 and 6. Quote, "For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. Therefore let us not sleep, as do others, but let us watch and be sober." End quote. And then there's this warning in the book of Revelation, chapter 16, verse 15, quote, "Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame." End quote. Number one, Christ, who revealed this vision to John of Patmos, is stating that the returned Christ Spirit will come as a thief, meaning he will appear, do his spiritual thievery tasks, then he'll leave the scene with a very few people actually having realized it for some time thereafter. Number two, he's telling his followers to keep vigilant and watch, meaning investigate, to find the thief. Note that by stating keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, the meaning of this advice is that the garments symbolize the good qualities which a person possesses, such as love, sincerity, honesty, etc. He or she who watcheth must keep their good character. A good character adorns a person just like his or her garments. So as one watches for the returned Messiah, he or she must be honest and sincere in his or her search, honest with him or herself and with others. But the need to watch is over now. You now know of two prime candidates for the fulfillment of the Bible prophecies of the coming of the Messiah of the latter days. Next step, your investigation into the lives and teachings of Baha'u'llah and the Bab must begin. What exactly should you investigate? Their lives and characters, the sacrifices they made to bring us this new revelation from God. Did they willingly give up any earthly wealth, power, or position to bring humankind a loving message from God? Their teachings. Were these teachings high-minded and worthy to elevate humanity spiritually? Or did they appeal to the basest of human thoughts and deeds? Did the places they found themselves, the events before, during, and after their lives and their teachings, fulfill any Bible prophecies of the coming of the Elijah figure and or the Messiah? In Matthew chapter 7 verse 20, when asked by his disciples how they would know a true prophet from a false one, quote, "By their fruits ye shall know them," end quote. This all means that you have some investigating to do, but only if you want to follow the instructions of Jesus Christ, that is. I thought I'd include a short prayer here to ask for God's assistance and protection. It is offered to you to assist you in your investigation. As you delve into the Baha'i writings, you will note that we have hundreds of revealed prayers to help guide us in our spiritual thoughts and communications. This prayer was written by Baha'u'llah himself. Ordain, O Lord, through thy most exalted pen, that which will immortalize our souls in the realm of glory, will perpetuate our names in thy kingdom, and safeguard our lives in the treasuries of thy protection, and our bodies in the stronghold of thy inviolable fastness. Good luck in your spiritual quest in life. You may be wondering where to begin. I'll provide some resources in the next several slides to help you out. I highly recommend beginning with this book that provides an interesting overview of the Baha'i Faith, its main figures, history, beliefs, and its followers, without being preachy or trying to convert you. Its title is Baha'u'llah and the New Era by the author J.E. Esselmont. Having knowledge of some of the history of the Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i Faith will be very helpful to you when you get to the point of reading the sacred and authoritative texts. This book is available through Amazon.com and probably some other online book vendors too. It may even be in your local library for free. And don't forget this option in your investigation: contacting Baha'is in your area. If you live in the United States, you can contact Baha'is in your area by calling our USA National Center at 800.228 .6483, 800-228-6483. Note that the phones are staffed from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Central Time. Or you can go online to bahai.us, where you will find on the website, on that first page of the website, a box labeled Contact Us. Just click on that box and follow the instructions to leave your contact information. The USA National Center staff will then refer your inquiry to Baha'is who live in your area. If you live in another country, enter into your internet browser bahai.org / then the two-letter acronym for your country, such as UK for the United Kingdom, FR for France, NZ for New Zealand, etc., such as you see on the screen. Unfortunately, not all Baha'i National Centers are accessible this way. For example, the Baha'i National Center for Canada is not accessible using this format. In those cases, just enter, for Canada that is, National Center for the Baha'is of whatever country into your internet browser to get that country's website. Then there's this book titled Some Answered Questions, written by the son of Baha'u'llah named Abdu'l-Baha. He was a very special person in the Baha'i Faith, endowed by his father with special abilities. I find his writings to be very logical and detailed, but in a very readable way. This book has answers to questions about biblical and spiritual topics. It's especially helpful to Christians who are just introduced to the Baha'i Faith. He also explains the meanings of several Bible prophecies. You can get the book through the Baha'i Bookstore for the USA through the website bahaibookstore.org. And there is also a free access to the online version through the website at the very bottom of this slide, bahai.org / library. When you get there, click on Abdu'l-Baha's name on that site, which will then allow you to select the book Some Answered Questions. In a couple slides, I'll list a bunch of websites for you, including this one for the online library. This professionally produced documentary on the life and divine mission of the Bob really transports you to that time and place. It is available for free on YouTube in the channel named The Gate Film. All one word, no spaces. The Gate Film. It's there on the slide. The link to the video is on the bottom of the screen. You'll have to write it down and type it into your internet browser. The title of the documentary is The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith. The Gate being the Bob, if you recall. Don't worry about the accent marks above the A and the I if you enter the video title into the YouTube search box. Note that you want to search for the full video, not a trailer. It's available in English, so you have to look for the English version, and in a couple other languages. And now a couple slides with some websites. First, there's bahai.org. This is the international official website for those seeking information about the Baha'i Faith, and it has a link to the online library of sacred and authoritative texts of the faith. Next is bahai.us. It's the official website of the Baha'is of the United States for seekers who want information about the American Baha'i community. Then bahai.org/library. This is the direct access to free access to the sacred and authoritative texts of the faith. Next, at the very bottom is BahaiBookstore.com. is the official online bookstore for the USA. Anyone can purchase books, videos, music, and some other items through this website. And the Baha'is of the United States have a presence on both Facebook and its own YouTube channel. Both of their pages in these websites go by the name Baha'is of the United States, as you see on the right there. Then there's BahaiTeachings.org. This is a blog site where you can find numerous articles written about subjects touching on the Baha'i Faith and the teachings. It's not an official website, but rather is produced by some individual Baha'is. Next is the access address to the YouTube channel of the Wilmette Institute, which is an online Baha'i educational site that has webinars and actual online courses, some free, some at a cost, on a wide spectrum of Baha'i topics. The easiest way to get there is to go to youtube.com, then in the search box put their channel name, Wilmette Institute, that you see there. Next, we have a world news service about the Baha'i Faith. It can be reached through news.bahai.org. And to read some examples of some Baha'i prayers, go to Baha'i Prayers, all one word, bahaiprayers.org. Here's a list of many of my other videos on Bible prophecy fulfillment by the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and the Baha'i Faith. You can read the titles. There's a variety of prophecy topics. Note that the video on the top left, Christ Has Returned, focuses on the time prophecies in the Bible that indicate, first, when the first advent of the Messiah would occur, meaning Jesus Christ, and second, when that is the year, that the Messiah would return in the latter days. Pause the video to review them to see if any might interest you. Instructions on how to access them, all for free on YouTube. Shortly I'll show you how to access them. That's on the next slide. Also, one of these videos, Thief in the Night, that you see highlighted by the yellow rectangle, has a lot of background information that may be helpful if you choose to research the Baha'i Faith. The sections of interest include the below. Next to each topic is the time marker for that video where the topic begins. Again, pause the video if you wish to write anything down. Here is how to find my videos on my Bible Prophecy Fulfillment channel on YouTube. You you go to youtube.com and then enter the channel name as shown below, in the middle there I should say, into the search box on the YouTube website. So it's Integral Destiny 9. That's all one word, no spaces between the words. Integral Destiny numeral 9. That will get you to the list of my videos. And you should hit the tab on my channel that says videos at the top to see them all. Another way of accessing my channel is to enter that URL into your internet browser. And it's all free, there's no charge. And I do not get any money either for my video, for people watching my videos. Thank you for watching. Please note that this production is not an official production of the Baha'i Faith community. It was written, produced, and narrated by me alone. Contact me at that email address if you have any questions. All copyright protections are claimed. Do not change any information, slide, diagram, or narration without my permission. And please do not charge a fee to anyone for viewing this video or any part of it. I do not make any money from these videos. I consider this a service and a gift to my fellow human beings.